You are currently on a button. Got it. Default.
Button.
Zoom. Reactions.
Button.
In your internet connection is unstable.
Window.
Content is empty. You are currently on a button. AI companion. Reactions.
Button.
Okay, no problem. So when the ethnographic conversation becomes blurred, the stories become fragmented and contradictory, or some words become unutterable and secret, when our interlocutors keep still, look down, or struggle to find a word to express an emotion, a feeling, a memory, or a future hope, in these moments, ethnography seems to be in a dead end from which it is to escape without a sense of unease. There are subjects and objects that elude the usual methodologies. When facing these, an ethnography needs to learn to imagine alternative, multifold, and creative forms of inquiry and writing. In the field, there is a thin line between what is to be told and what is not. When coming close to that border, ethnographers may find that it is possible to engage in a conversation that goes beyond words and make itself through images, drawings, photos, poems, novels, music, and songs. Here, ethnography comes to understand multimodal, minor, creative, unlearned experiences and practices of collaborative research. These experiments rise and reminds us of some epistemological, methodological, and ethical issues. How can we co-construct an alternative space of creative dialogue with our research subjects? Which are the research subjects or objects that comfort the ethnographers with this methodological and political challenge? When and how can we propose an alternative research space? What do we do with the ethnographic material that we collect through these practices? How do we analyze, share, and translate the outcomes of an experimental ethnography? How do these methodologies manage to communicate something more? These and many other questions have fueled the conversation that Francesca and I have engaged in over the past few years. Drawing on our fields of research, we started thinking about the limitations of words and the possibilities opened up by alternative and direct or differently direct forms of communication that can convey something also through their shape and not only through their content. During my PhD, I conduct research in the field of childhood and youth studies. I carry out ethnography in a group home where I met some young offenders involved in crimes linked to mafia-style criminal organization who were separated by their families and the local communities following a court order aimed at providing them with a program of rehabilitation to legality. When I met Maurizio, one of the young participants in my research, I encountered a body to look at, to read. Maurizio embodied a narrative flow where I could recognize identity symbols and fragments of his path, but persistent, unforgettable daily life resurfacing on his skin. Hence, I decided to ask Maurizio to co-construct a space of dialogue around his body, about his body. To be honest, when I proposed to Maurizio that he tell me his story starting with his tattoos, asking him to draw those with pen and paper, I was not sure what the outcome would be. Then when I was writing, I tried to build a connection between body and words, skin and narrative, flesh and lived experience. Maurizio's sketches became complementary to my writing. His drawings not only enrich, but became essential to my account. Afterwards, I had the feeling that Maurizio, while drawing, was as well telling his story to himself, and that he was listening to himself, thus creating an intimate space of imagination. It was an attempt, an experiment that offered me the opportunity to listen to an intimate, deep, and detailed story. Mostly it was for this young man the chance to remember, relive, and actually reclaim his story.
And as for my experience, I started challenging ethnography during my PhD, when I carried out research on refugees and asylum seekers' experiences of crisis in the Italian system of asylum. And when I was trying to find a way to explore and account for non-ordinary experiences going beyond and actually also forgetting psychological categories and languages, and instead relying on the creative potential of the language of symptoms. And in my postdoc, so after my PhD, I have been studying the so-called educational mobility, and in particular, how transnational students imagine migration and how these imaginaries impact their experiences. And there is one encounter in particular that changed my ethnographic attitude. With Arinas, we started a conversation about memory, truths and lies that soon intertwined with reflections on language and on different forms of expression. She showed me her drawings and her writings, and she was talking about not only what she drew and wrote, but also how she drew and wrote. Arinas, in her drawing and her writings, did not proceed sequentially from the beginning to the end, and rather she wrote sections and fragments when they came up, gradually assembling a story or a picture. And I propose we start writing together. Instead of working towards a comprehensive understanding of her unsettling experiences, I wanted to follow her, to get fragmented myself and shred my writing practice into pieces. And we mingled our writings, my ethnography with her novel. This experiment transformed the both of us, offering the possibility to invent and not just understand her and my experience. And I am truly grateful to Zaccaria Rani, who is not with us today, but he was the one with whom this reflection started.
So this roundtable represents for us the first opportunity to share our questions and consideration, hoping it will be a starting point for future discussions and analysis. So ethnography, and in particular the ethnography of the elusive, exposes us to challenges, failures, wonders, and transformations. We want to develop with you a collective reflection that could be in the making compass for future explorations.
Okay, so before we start and before we give you the floor, I'll just recap the few rules of the game. Okay, so we are going to ask 3 rounds of questions. So we'll read the question. We already shared this question in advance, so you already have those. But since there are a few participants, I'll read the questions, and I will leave you the floor. Since we are online, I suggest we follow the order we have on the conference webpage, but to just facilitate the turns, sorry, I will call the names. So first Francesca, then Donatella, then Amanda, then Menahil, and then Eleni. But I'll ask you to start answering, okay, just to facilitate it. We would like for you to keep your answers short in the 4 minutes time. We won't be very strict. We'll just interrupt you if you go too much over your time. And after these 3 rounds of questions and answers, we will shortly wrap up what has come up, and then we will start the debate, the discussion. So we leave to you the floor again. And okay, so we won't be having questions during the 3 rounds, questions from you during the 3 rounds of questions and answers, but we will open the floor to questions also to the participants after the 3 rounds. And you can ask questions in whatever way you prefer, by raising your hand, by raising your virtual hand on Zoom, by interrupting, opening the mic and talking. It's just a few of us, and there's no problem with that. So if everything is clear, or I don't know if we skipped something. No, I think everything is clear. So we can start. Will I read the first question? Okay. So we start with a question, and we also ask you to briefly tell who you are and where you're working. So you can start your answer just by briefly introducing your name and where you're working. And then we wanted to ask you, what is your fieldwork? And specifically, what was the ethnographic encounter or situation that made you rethink your approach and employ alternative methodologies and forms of writing? And we can start with Francesca.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Francesca and Marta, for this opportunity. So my name is Francesca Cancelliere. I'm based in Lisbon in this moment. I finished my PhD in medical anthropology in December 2023. And now I'm also a psychologist and psychotherapist. So in this moment, I'm actually working more in this side. So I give psychosocial support and psychotherapy to migrant people in Lisbon. Can I start? Yes. So my field work occurred in Maputo, the capital city of Mozambique, where for my PhD research, I investigated the politics of care and adherence in the biomedical setting related to antiretroviral therapy, and how they have affected young people living with the virus of HIV. I aim to explore the everyday lives of young people between 11 and 20 years old who contract the virus through mother-to-child transmission, and they call vertical transmission, and who manifest difficulties in complying with treatment. They were being considered by the medical staff already in the last stage of AIDS. I started attending a daily center for HIV-positive people in social-economical disadvantaged situation, which became crucial in getting to know the young participant involved in the research. Then the field became itinerant. I rarely spent more than half a day in the center and began to spend time with them, in the health centers, in the hospital during the long hospital stay, on the way home, and in all the other activities that they consider actually important. These were all precious moments that gave me a better understanding of how their lives were structured and the difficulties they face every day. Currently, I conduct research within institutions, interview with NGO and donors. Working in a context like this, it is of great vulnerability and suffering, particularly with young people, often made me rethink my role and my methodology. Essentially, my ethnographic field was relational and emotional, filled with uncertainties, tension, and doubts. I believe that my profession and my background as a psychologist allow me to hold a particular position in the field. However, my dual perspective also posed the risk that my role as a researcher could be confused or misunderstood by the participants. Day by day, I became increasingly involved, and as I expected, I was asked by the psychology in charge to offer psychosocial support to young people in the daily center. This resulted in a great sense of responsibility that developed also in various actions carried out during the fieldwork to try to improve their situation. For this reason, the well-being of the participant will always be a priority concerning the collection of the ethnographical data. Working with children and adolescents living with the virus of HIV elicits a very broad range of emotion. Overall, their verbal and bodily ability to tell their story about living and dying with HIV was extremely powerful. Deciding to talk about emotion in my thesis and using them as an ethnographical lens to help understand the experience was not obvious. Also, if I was aware that I was dealing with an emotionally and relationally complex field, I think I only started thinking about it when I was already immersed in the field. For this reason, I remember that my writing were initially divided in two: a file diary, personal and full of reflection and feelings, and the file notes, which tried to describe in an objective form what was happening. This division, subjective, objective, rational, emotional, turned out to be an epic failure. Indeed, every experience we have in the world and the memories of this experience, fieldwork or not, are made up of emotion. During the first few months in the center, and particularly during conversation with the young people I encounter in the informal moments, I felt that with some of them, interaction through dialogue was often difficult. It was not a tool that made young people feel comfortable to talk. Speaking about feeling, emotion was not common. And also in particular because they come from an emotionally complex context. Most of them were orphans and they were living in a violent family context. So I also felt that it increased the power imbalance between participant and the researcher. Searching for alternative methodologies, visual methods start to attract my attention. I finished to answer for the first question.
Okay, thanks a lot. The second is Donatella.
Yes, I will need to share my PowerPoint if it is possible.
Yes, sure. You
So
can
can
share
I go
your.
ahead? Okay, that's good. Okay. I'd like to know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. So basically, while I'm Donatella Schmidt, I am working at the University of Padua in northeastern part of Italy. I have been working for practically 20 years or something like that with migrants and refugees, let's say something like that. And previous than that, I have been working with indigenous communities in Argentina and Eastern Paraguay. And at the moment, still keeping my interest on forced migration, I am also adding it with the reinterpretation of the St. Anthony's celebration. I mean, from the point of view of migrants. I mean, St. Anthony Basilic and essentially is the second most visited in the world. So, I mean, obviously it attracts attention also of migrants community. In any event, today I like, to shift a little bit from the strictly emergency settings and urban encampments where I have been working for the last 6 or 7 years in the city of Rome. And I like to actually engage you very briefly in the couple of minutes I have in this very first part in this kind of project that was actually started with a European solicitation and a European project that's is called Food Together. That really tries to to find alternative ways through food to foster encounters in the public space, especially. I am not lingering on the project, but then if you are interested, the project is over at the moment in any event. Okay, so what I like actually to focus our attention is on this group of, as a matter of fact, 3 refugees that traditionally did all the kind of route from Afghanistan through Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Greece, and then finally landing in Italy, that set up this culinary experience that they call Peace and Spice. That's a sort of non-ethnic, as a matter of fact, restaurants, and that's located at the center of the University Historical District in Padova. And so here are some information concerning the initiative and the fragile setting that I like to draw our attention upon is the fact that, of course, they were starting up their initiative, and they found themselves during the COVID period, in which such initiative could have been closed easily because of problems, obviously, that everybody faced, especially this kind of very young, I would say, entrepreneurships. So, as you could see, the staff was entirely composed by migrants and refugees, and having also, I mean, people from the different refugee centers and hospitality centers that could have a sort of stage over there, or an internship with them, matter of fact. Okay, and given, and I am stopping here, given this kind of period in which we started our research with them, and very particular period in which food could only be delivered, we decided to go ahead with alternative methodology that could keep alive the attention on their entrepreneurship and capture still a place in the city panorama of this kind of food entrepreneurship. So I suppose that right now I'll give the floor to somebody else, and the second part of this kind of reflection would be as we set up an alternative way of dealing with fieldwork that we call a trip as a dish.
Thank you so much, Donatella and Amanda.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope the connection is good enough for this. So I'm Amanda José, and I'm still doing my PhD in the University of Neuchâtel, and I conducted my fieldwork, my research in the department of San Martin in Peru. I was looking for the transmission of know-hows of the cultivation of organic cocoa. So basically, it was between 2018 and 2021, and then I continued interviews until online interviews with some researchers until 2023. And so I did kind of a classical ethnography, and I visited some community. I did some interview, I did some participant observation. And I soon realized that this approach was not enough for me, but I didn't find any alternative methodologies because I couldn't find around me a network that would support me to find alternatives. So for me, the alternative methodology was more coming in the form of writing, in the form of poetry and free writing. And it came up for different reasons because mostly cocoa cultivation is not seen as a place where emotion could come up. It's like growing fruit and selling them, and it seems like something without emotions at first sight. But there are two things that made me that touched me emotionally really in a really strong way. Well, first I did all my field work with my children. I have like 2 children, and it is in the region of my husband, where my husband grew up. So every time we would go there, we would meet with the family, with his brother, sister, mother, uncle, aunts, cousins. Well, it was an excuse also to go there and to build ties between my children and their own family, their own extended family. It was like an important personal motivation. I couldn't take field work alone with my children, with my husband, with my stepsister, with my stepbrother. So it was really the challenges of blurring the limits, the boundaries between professional and personal situation. Fieldwork was never only a professional motivation. It was never only for the cocoa cultivation. It was
Audio
also
now
for
unmuted.
personal. So everything was mixed, and everything there was an interaction that was a bit strong about gender, class, or race discrimination. It also touched me really deeply. And I think the second reason was also because I was based in Switzerland and I did research, I conducted research in Peru, where the cocoa was based. So there was colonial and neo-colonial forms of oppression, of discrimination that were really strong. And simply, and I can describe them briefly, but for example, the price between the price that is paid to the producer, so the farm gate price, is very low in comparison with the consumer price for the cocoa. And even in sustainable and organic value chains, it stays quite low. Now it's changing a bit with the cocoa price that is getting higher, but still. And furthermore, like cocoa farmers don't earn a lot, but the cooperative managers, the agronomists, the resellers, and also the researchers, as I was, earn much more than the cocoa producers. In the case of sustainable and organic chocolate and cocoa, there are a lot of research programs that employ graduates, people from abroad that come and simply study and have access to the field, ask questions, and then they go. And this position make this position of research really uncomfortable. And it was really, I really went to different states of disgust, of rage, of sadness. It was a strong moment. And when I had to read my notes again, when I had to listen to the interviews again, it was really difficult because every time I was listening, I was kind of getting to a state of dizziness, and I could not even continue analyzing. So then I started. So the classical way of analyzing data was not sufficient for me to go on with analysis. I simply couldn't simply read the interview and make some notes and then write about that. It's still really difficult for me, even years after that. And so I started with poetry and free writing. So I will tell in the next question how I developed this.
Audio now
approach.
unmuted. Word.
Sorry?
Page 1 content.
Thanks
it
a
was
lot.
the automatic.
Page 1 of 3.
Thanks a
Auto.
lot,
In edit text.
Wanda.
Page 1.
Menahil.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Minahil. I am doing my PhD from the Ludwig Maximilians University, Munich.
Ethnography with the heart of upload research.
And the fieldwork here, because of which I am participating in this roundtable, is also the part of my doctoral research. So my doctoral study is concerned with the Afghan migrants in Pakistan. So for my research, I am focusing on the Afghans who migrated to Pakistan after the Taliban took charge of the affairs of the country in August 2021. So for my research, I am primarily focusing on the very recent wave of migrants in Pakistan and not the refugees living in Pakistan from before.
For different reason. Taking
Um,
charge of the country's
so with this,
early in.
for this, I conducted so far, because it's an ongoing research, but so far I have conducted 2 phases of fieldwork, both spanning between 4 and 5 months, starting from March 2022 till May 2023. And the cities in which I conducted my fieldwork were the federal capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, and the twin city,
Duration of fieldwork.
Rawalpindi, which is also my hometown.
First ethnographic experience.
So because this was my first ethnographic
Being someone with
experience,
partial-sightedness.
and I expected it to be different, based on the fact that I mean, I call partial sightedness, which might be a euphemism, but still. So because of my partial sightedness, I expected that the experience, like my ethnographic experience, would be different, but then I did not know how, in what way, or what it, like how it would be, in what way it would be different, what exactly it would be like. I did not know what to expect from my fieldwork experience, and I also wasn't sure about
On the research.
the impacts on, like what impacts it might have on my research, or
Contribution towards
what
ethnographic research.
contribution could my fieldwork experience have towards the ethnographic research
Seeing is not of
methods,
primary significance.
especially where seeing is not of primary significance there.
Sensory ethnography, embodied ethnography.
So in my sensory ethnography, or what I call the embodied
played a significant
ethnography,
part.
touch really played a significant part
Something that I did not
there.
anticipate.
And this is something that I did not anticipate before going into the field. And also, I would say that I didn't expect that it was coming up, at least for quite a few weeks, even during my fieldwork, like in the start of my fieldwork as well.
American literature.
And here I would just refer to, very briefly refer to that to some literature from the field of nursing, where there are studies on touch and different types of touch discussed there. But I would mention only 2 of them here, the ones that are most relevant to me.
Task-oriented touch.
One is the task-oriented touch,
Protective touch or caring touch.
and the other is a protective or caring touch. And so I conclude my response to this first question by just also summarizing in a way that for me, the situation was because of my personal ability / disability. But then the encounter, the ethnographic encounter here, I would say, was in most cases the performativity of touch, but also in some cases the non-performativity of touch. And then we'll discuss the rest later. Thank you.
Thank you, Menahil and Eleni.
Zoom.ux. Zoom meeting.
Thank you. I'm a doctoral social anthropologist, and since completing my doctoral studies for the past 3 years and a half, I've been working in the area of policymaking, mainly. So I do research that informs public policies and the decisions made around them. And I'm also the poetry editor with Otherwise Not.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm not sure if it's just our problem, but we are not hearing you very well. There is a sort of echo.
Is it better now? Yes.
Yeah, you can try to go on. Yeah, probably if you just get a bit closer to your microphone, we'll try. Okay.
Yeah, so I mentioned just now that for the past 3 years and a half, I've been working in the area of policymaking since completing my PhD studies, but I'm also a poetry editor with Otherwise magazine. And today I'm here, or tonight, I'm here with my poetry editor hat on, so I will be mainly speaking from the Otherwise perspective, but also bringing some of my personal research experience where this is relevant. I'm going to paste the link for otherwise in the chat, just for people to have a look if they want to. So otherwise, it's an open access online magazine of storytelling and ethnography. I will speak about it in more detail later, but this is the link. So to answer the first question, I will have to go back to my doctoral research, which took place a while ago. So it took place between September 2017 and December 2018, and it was on a remote island in the northernmost part of Greece, which is called Santraki. And it is also where I'm joining you from today. And though initially I planned to focus on a slightly different topic, my research changed when a few days after the commencement of official field work, the majority of the island flooded. And this even included the mountainous communities, which was something that was reported to happen for the first time on the island. That was a result of a deluge that had not been adequately forecast by the meteorological authorities and resulted in the island being declared in a state of emergency for a full year. So this event...
Sorry, Eleni, sorry to interrupt you again, but it's very difficult for me, not sure if also for everybody else, but it's very difficult to hear you. There is a lot of noise. I don't know if you have... Okay.
Is there still a noise?
No, not yet. Not anymore. Okay.
So yeah, the deluge of the island drew my attention to environmental disasters and the impact that this have on the affected population, and particularly how we do research around these disasters and communicate the findings to the wider public in ways that are accessible. And also an issue of concern for me became how we engage in research with people who experience trauma at the same time, and how we enable them to share their experiences in ways that are meaningful and ideally in ways that empower them through the research process. And I have to take a step back here and say that even though there was a challenging situation, I was privileged to already have the tools to handle it. So this is something I owe mainly to my grandmother, who had passed down the love and skill of writing poetry to me. So I started writing poetry very early in my life. Roughly soon after I learned how to write generally. And this is a practice I have maintained to this day. So in other words, poetry came into my life a lot sooner than anthropology did, but along the way they found each other, and since then they have been proceeding hand in hand in a way. So to go back to the deluge and the aftermath of that, while everyone's emotions, including my own emotions, were too much to handle, my field notes and my diary entries took the form of poems, and poetry became a method of recording data that was the most bearable and the most sympathetic to my state of being, but also to the state of being of others. It allowed me to capture emotions, fears, but also silences, and all those that was left unsaid. And though it took me months to realize, poetry also became a coping mechanism for handling my personal trauma following the disaster. And as you may suspect already, this opened the door for the ethnography, which is a door that I have kept open, wide open for her, as a researcher ever since. Another way of recording data that I extensively used while I was in the field was taking pictures, particularly because I wanted to depict the different recovery phases of the disaster. And the recovery phase was very, very long, longer than a year actually. And while taking pictures at that point, it was mainly reflex, also a result of practices I had developed before my field work. It proved the most useful tool in terms of remembering at the write-up stage. So that allowed me to access and reconstruct the ever-changing post-disaster landscape on the island, day by day, month by month, even though I had to write about it a year and a half later. So one aspect was how to conduct the research, but another was how to communicate the findings, which I mentioned before. And as a result of my field work, I developed an interest in ways of writing that are truly accessible. So this means writing that is not restricted to an expert audience, but also it is writing that concerns the wider public. And this is what brought me close to Otherwise magazine. And I will be mainly talking to the Otherwise for the rest of the questions. But just to give you a quick idea, Otherwise is a magazine focused on storytelling that is empowered from ethnographic research and activism, and this is expressed through fiction and non-fiction writing, poetry, and visual essays. The stories featured are about the experiences we share, the ordinary and everyday life, and they can be written by anyone, but they should also be able to be read by anyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Just a question for Eleni. If for the next round of questions you could have, I don't know, earphones or a microphone that could help, because we could listen to you, but if you can, I mean, if you don't have those, we can manage it, but it's probably better if you have some, if you try. Sorry for that, but I think it's easier. Could you maybe turn on the caption? Yeah, we can. Yes, I will, if I will be able to, but I'll try. I'll launch the next round of questions, and then I also open up the captions. So just a second, I lost. Okay. So the second question is, what methods did you engage in, and how did those methods transform your research? And we can start with Francesca.
I will just share a presentation with you that are just some pictures. Is it okay? Do you hear me? Yes. Just a moment. Can you see it? Yes? Okay. So I feel that it might be interesting here to talk about three aspects of my research that are the creation of the support group, photo voice, and body mapping, and how they became a methodological and therapeutical tool at once. I would like to underline that in my research, the use of art-based methodology complements my ethnography, is not replace it in total. So the support group. After a few months of field work, I decided together with the coordinator of the center to create a support group for young people with treatment-related issues. Building the support group as a safe space takes time, but allow them to talk openly about sensitive issues in their lives, starting a process of deconstruction of the healed body and reshaping identities in an environment created by wishes, expectations, and challenges. The group was characterized by a great flexibility relating to time, schedule, and space. Members could arrive when they choose to, and attendance was not mandatory. This flexibility proved to be powerful in the creation of a safe space. I reconsider the willingness to participate in the group, as well as the method that had been negotiated at the beginning and during the research process itself. Each session has three different moments: the icebreaker, the main activity, and the food. As the participants arrive at the meeting immediately after school, or they would go to school after the meeting, was really important to eat properly, especially concerning the taking of the second-line antiretroviral treatment. During the first session, we decided that everyone would be in charge of bringing food and drink for the whole group on an alternating basis. And I usually give a small amount of money to the one in charge to buy the ingredient and cook for the others. Also, if research compensation is really controversial, in particular for structurally vulnerable population, in my work, the chance of cooking for the others engage a sense of responsibility and sharing toward the groups, affecting other aspects of group relation. Photo voice that you are already seeing. During the research project, I was inspired to implement the use of camera from the auto-driven interview technique. I reframed the methodology to adapt it to the group context with disposable cameras. I introduced the project Quem Sou Eu? Who Am I? As a project in which they could show how life was to a stranger through photographs. During the first session, each of us make a roundup of our daily routines to think together about what aspect would eventually be important to capture. Before we start, we discuss central aspects together, such as photographing strangers, asking permission, not taking pictures in sensible places. But the moment of sharing the picture in the group was powerful and revealed how some issue and interpretation might have otherwise remained dormant in face-to-face dialogue. Body mapping. I stepped into body mapping while rethinking methodological tools through an online course at the University of Cape Town called Art and Medicine. Body mapping was defined by Gastaldo as a process of creating body maps using drawing, painting, or other art-based techniques to visually represent the aspect of people's life, body and world. It is in a way of telling stories. I analyzed the story maps in their entry, including the process of creation, how this was shared among the participants, the body maps themselves, and the narratives that accompanied them, as Rose's methodology suggests. As shown in the picture, during the creation process in this picture, particularly in this one, they were able to paint over their body and were free to modify their body shaping whichever way they wanted. In my work, body map has been a powerful therapeutical and research tool, since it had the potential to engage and enable participants to communicate creatively through a deeper, more reflexive process. Thank you.
Right, thank you. We can go on with Donatella.
Sorry. Okay. Do I have the, well, let me see.
Yes, your slide, your screen.
My screen? Yes. Okay. Let me see what's happening here on the screen. Okay. Can you hear me in any event? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. Yes, I was telling you that our ethnography research then dealt with this entrepreneurship of young Afghani refugees that set up a restaurant activity during actually the COVID period. Our research was focused during the COVID period. So obviously there were some problems connected with that. So what we have been doing, matter of fact, we decided to resort to a photo exhibition that was actually studied in this way. We we called this photo exhibition a dish as a trip. Why? Because it stemmed from the consideration that the menu offered by this entrepreneurial activity did not offer just dishes, but rather a culinary experience containing the tastes and foods experienced and tried during this long journey I was mentioning before, from Afghanistan, passing through Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and finally settling in Italy. All these tastes were then recreated and offered to the local customers and to the university students. So, methodologically, we asked the owners of Peace and Spice to identify dishes which could better interpret the theme, a dish as a trip, and gather photographs able to capture their memories, their emotion, that were springing from selected dishes they decided to talk about. We then record the narration of every selected photograph containing the dish story, with it's not only with the story, but also with the meaning attached to the story. And we finally ask to come out with a caption for each photographs in order to condense its meaning in that caption. And the final outcome was the image exhibition that was the result of a 10-man long participatory process and a mutual exchange of knowledge. And here I would like to share with you briefly, how we are setting up the exhibit. And the two guys here are two of the three owners that, so we are at in the stage of setting up the exhibit. And here actually we have a process of setting up. Each of these picture was selected by them, discussed with us, and then the caption that's not visible over here is condensing the moment, a specific moment in which I mean, there was this history of the restaurants through images in this, and in the background you can see university students. The university it was in the process of reopening, but still it was during the period. And here we have the staff. This guy is one of the three Afghan guys, but then the other one are refugees that actually are still hosted in structures. Here they are working, and you can see, as you can see, there are also some women working. Here is the owner that's actually preparing dishes, and over here they are presenting. And cooking. So here is one another one of the owners as well, and this obviously was the moment during the COVID period, and this is actually at the end of the 10 months period. We could we rephrased the photo exhibit that was actually larger. And as you can see, people again could enjoy the outdoor part of the restaurants, enjoying the photo exhibition that was there for sometimes, even when the restaurants was closed and there was only a takeaway delivery. So, as you can see, the very lively context of the university district, once that it was again feasible, this kind of operational activity. And and over here, actually, this kind of exhibition production, co-production is actually the result and the methodology we have been resorting to during the COVID period. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Amanda.
Okay, so as I was saying before, there was 2 points that made me change my approach about writing. First, the constant blurring between professional and personal dimension. And the other was the really strong and intense emotions I was feeling because I was getting included in strong relation, post-colonial and neo-colonial relations. So for me, academic writing was not helpful at all, the way of analyzing data. And for me, the main problem was the strong emotion I was feeling. And I think every researcher is facing emotions during research because we are only tool of research. So we are, I think, more in ethnography, we have to engage our whole self in the research. There is little space for escaping depending on how we are managing our research and how we are organizing. It's changing a bit, but still it's really an important point of being the whole self included in research. So for me, it was important to listen to my emotions when I was analyzing data, but also to the emotions of others during listening the interviews and reading the notes. And I was more and more aware of the silences, of the thing that we could not say. For example, of the discriminations against women that is really difficult to talk about. It's really difficult to name it, and it's really difficult to see how even in sustainable programs they can reinforce this kind of discrimination. So for me to start, like as I said also before, cocoa is not emotional, not supposed to be important in my research, neither in rural anthropology, neither in global value chains. And it was really difficult for me to name and to make recognize this. And for me, like how can we grasp violence when it's not supposed to appear in the field? And empathy, of being the whole self in research, make that empathy is really important also in research. And it's really, there is little space in academic space to talk about the emotional impacts of research on the researchers. Even if we work with people that have difficulties, there is few psychological support. So for me, free writing and poetry have been both my therapy in some way, of what I lived during research, and also my way of analyzing. So the both, like kind of autotherapy and analysis would go on until I could simply talk about some event during research without being totally affected and without, while that was the main problem. So for me, poetry is like ethnography, is about listening with the whole self. It's a citation, and it can be a transformative tool, so both for therapy, but also to make sense of power relations that appear during the research. Yeah, and it really helped me to name gender, class, and race dimension discrimination that would appear during research.
Audio now unmuted. Word, page 1 content, page 1, new line. New line.
Thanks a lot. Menahil.
Yeah.
Talking about performativity of touch.
Okay.
Question, annotations and annotations.
So here, in terms of methods, as I already discussed the performativity of touch, not really discussed, but just mentioned. So here I would want to relate an anecdote from my fieldwork. Many of my research partners identify themselves as Hazara, like Afghan Hazara, and they perceive they have a greater perception of threat based on their recognizability, which not only comes from their attire, like the types of clothes, ranging from what colors they wear, or the type of embroidery on mostly women's dresses, and like the type of caps worn that the men wear, but then also to do with the facial features. So with the others described to me, like the clothing and everything else, that could be changed when they wanted to hide their identity, when they did not want or they did not prefer to be recognized as Hazara, but then facial features are something that cannot be hidden as such. Like not in all cases, like women could still do a veil and hide most part of the face, but still some like the facial features still keep them like they are still identified or can be identified based on the facial features. And because that was very important and it came up again and again during my research and conversations with different research partners. So with one of them, I asked her to describe the facial features because I couldn't perceive them on my own. And in response to that question, I did receive a verbal description, yes, But then I was also offered by her to touch her face in order to know and to feel like what she was actually telling about the cheekbones or about the shape of the eyes, or generally explaining to me what the differences are. And with that, I was also I also got the chance to sort of compare hers with mine while she was also explaining it to me. So this in itself, like touching the face of someone solely for the purpose of knowing, was a very unique experience for me, like a very unique experience in itself. And I say it like this intersubjective experience really extends beyond trust and empathy. As it is said with touch, that it's a double bind in touch, that it's touch and to be touched. So it's touching and to be touched together at the same time. And so based on that, I also argue that there are my relations that are established in the field through this performativity of touch. And also in my case, it was in many cases my research partners sort of taking my responsibility in a way, being protective, being caring, guiding me on the way with the so for example, like with the if the ground is not level, if they feel that I am not in a very safe place, like for example, in some poorly constructed staircase, or like narrow passages or things like that. So like in my field work, I really feel with my, not all of my research partners, but with many of my research partners, it was more as if like in a way a dismissal of control on my part, where the power was shifted to the research partners instead. And as we say, power comes with responsibility. And I already mentioned before how well this responsibility was taken up by my research partners and fulfilled by them. So just to conclude my response here, I would say that the relations, as I mentioned before, established through touch, were not unidirectional, but I would rather call them transactional, which not only shaped and reshaped my attitude towards my research partners, but also their attitude towards me.
Thank you so much. Eleni.
I have switched to headphones. Do you think the sound that you get is better now, or is it still not so good?
Really better.
Oh, okay. So I
Thank
will
you.
go back to the first question. No, I'm joking. I want yeah, so what methods do we engage with? I'll speak from the Otherwise perspective in this case. So as I mentioned, Otherwise is a storytelling magazine, and storytelling can be expressed in a range of forms: poetry, fiction, nonfiction, virtual essays, and videos. And the importance of storytelling and the difference that it makes for me, if you ask me, is that it allows you, and to an extent can also empower you, to speak about situations and experiences you may be uncomfortable with, or that may be unwelcome for you to remember, or that make you feel unwell, or general experiences that you would probably prefer to forget, but for specific reasons you may not want to forget them, and you want to share them with the rest of the world and write about them. So storytelling in this case gives you options. You can narrate in the first person, hinting a connection with your own experience, or alternatively, you can narrate in the third person, taking a distance from what is being described. You can claim your story to be a fiction, or you can be clear that it is inspired by real life events. In Otherwise, we have seen what I would call proof of storytelling's potential, with the authors and the writers narrating their experiences with a range of of situations. So just to mention a few examples, this includes illness, abuse, gendered inequality, childhood traumas, people being on the move, incarceration, love and hate, safety and insecurity, unsafety and insecurity, war and death, and existence and sensations. So a story, when it is written well, what it does is that it makes the experience of one person relatable to the experience of many more. And this is why we have the team of editors, which includes fiction and fiction editors, visual and sound editors, multimodal editors, memoir editors, and of course, poetry editors, who work closely with the creators of the accepted submissions to make their stories as approachable and as relatable to the public. And personally, I like to think of storytelling as something that's dynamic, with stories having the capacity to transcend themselves and their initial purposes, taking a life of their own as they're being shared. So think of stories, for example, as Timo Brien has described them, and I'm going to quote him here. So stories are for those late hours in the night when you can't remember how you got from where you were to where you are. Stories are for eternity, when memory is erased, when there is nothing to remember except the story. End of the quote. So I will go back to my fieldwork for a second. And while I was still doing the fieldwork on Samothraki, I started sharing thoughts and reflections about the impact of the deluge in the form of poems and ethnographic narratives using my poetry blog. And all of a sudden, what was previously a poetry blog changed, and there was a new category called research diaries, and it aimed to be read by the islanders themselves and also with a wider audience interested in these discussions, therefore extending the audience of these emerging anthropological findings. To my surprise, particularly because I was experimenting with something very new, people were indeed reading the blog entries in this category, but also other blog entries, and even islanders were catching up with me in person about something they read the other day. For example, they wanted to discuss it further, so it created also a connection point with further participants. And while I was still in that process, I remember I was recalling Walter Benjamin's writing and his analysis of storytelling as a form of experience theory that is in decline. So Benjamin is primarily concerned with the disconnection, the lack of immediacy between the person creating the story and those who receive the story. And this is a gap that we, and let's say we as poets, writers, we have not addressed nowadays, because the ways we share the stories is mainly in the written format. And on the contrary, there are more gaps that have emerged in the meantime, such as the gap between the researcher and those being researched, the research itself, and society. So apparently, if you're interested in ethnographic storytelling, all the considerations I just mentioned set a new agenda, one with bigger challenges and even bigger anxieties. So how do you communicate your observations and your results to the communities that you work with, as well as others outside these communities that may be impacted by similar issues? How do you write in ways that are accessible beyond academia, but at the same time are relevant to the research community in itself? So engaging in ethnographic storytelling brings these questions to the forefront to you as a researcher, but also as a person who writes about research. And when these questions are prominently and repeatedly asked, they may result actually in reapproaching the way research is conducted in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then we can go on with the last round of questions. What challenges did you face, and how did the research participants and the academic community respond? Francesca.
So it was the most difficult one. I don't think that I can stay in 4 minutes, but I will try. First challenge for me concerned how to conduct a participatory and ethical research with young people in advanced stage of age. And these also mean concern issue of positionality. I think it's important to do a distinction, for me it was, about what is formal ethics and informal ethics. The formal ethic for me was having to go through the complex process proposed to all researchers in Mozambique in the National Bioethics Committee of the Ministry of Health, and it takes 6 months to get approval, and to have the production of this informed consent document. Also, if the informed consent document was obtained, was being signed by the minor and by the caretakers, I always ask myself how this document was really useful and how different degree of power may also affect this voluntary participation. Therefore, it became really necessary for me to imagine another different kind of ethical work that was more accessible and was more informal. And in line with this ethical nature of dialogue, research process and possible social ethical implications were discussed and explored during the whole process of the research between me and the participant. The aims of my research were frequently explained and discussed as my position also were discussed with them, and we outlined the program of our meeting, define places, time, and topics. The place for such dialogue cannot be created without the awareness and reflection on the tension that exists between oneself as the researcher and the others during the research process. And I think that also if we are using participatory ethics and methodologies, we have to be aware that there will be always an imbalance of power. So we have to remain very critical when we are using, and we think we are using youth-centered methods, thinking that we cannot completely remove the imbalance of power, we can mitigate it, but not remove it. Secondly, ethnographical practice, I think that has a cost, as Georges Devereux think, and is an emotional one, where I was deeply upset by the investigation of other human beings, and I find myself in the word of Ruth Behar to be a vulnerable observer. And they have other questions, and I don't have the answer. I think that is in my work. This means asking what does it mean to work at the margins? How ethical it is to engage in long-term research when some of the participants are in the last stage of AIDS? How much time do I have and for which purpose? How do I deal with grief in the research field? Is there a strategy to be prepared for? Before leaving Maputo, it was not my intention to deal directly with that. Very naively, and perhaps also as a form of coping, I wanted to work with the complexity and vulnerability of the life of people living with HIV. But I did not think that this choice would bring me so close to working with death and dying. I was not prepared for the death of the participant that occurred during and after the fieldwork, in particular that were felt to be avoidable if the health and social care structure were adequate. Rethinking the field, the way of dealing with grief and death, is an intricate cultural, personal, and relational issue. It is difficult to equip oneself to prepare for the field when talking about a situation of extreme suffering. I think that what you are called to do is to try to make sense of the experience, translating the emotional experience in the writing process, and then translate it in a call for action. Just a quick answer also to the second question. I always felt that the support group somehow was a kind of in progress giving back to them. And we made together in the group several reflections about how it was important and how this group was creating a new support network for them. And the works produced during the support group were exhibited during the International Day of the Fight Against AIDS, as I show in the picture, was the last picture. However, the group members wanted to be really active coordinators of the exhibition. As they want to explain, obviously they work to the visit, but these arise and create some concern about stigma, disclosure, protection, and privacy. However, it was a very important act of giving back for them also, and they have the chance to show their ability and stories to the public, and consequently also to themselves. On the academic side, I felt that this research led me to question the different possibility of being in the field. And at the time of my writing, I was the MACE coordinator, medical anthropology young scholar with Ursula Prost, and we felt together the sense of urgency in questioning more classical methodologies and positioning in the field. to make space for new form of being and acting. We decide to take the reflection to another level by organizing the 10 annual May meeting, being there medical anthropology in action, and then a special issue on the subject. And I think that the participation in the debate here in the various panels during the conference in Turin was confirmed the importance of this topic. And so we are here speaking exactly about this and rethinking and reconnecting and reimagining new form of being and staying in the field. Thank you.
Thank you. Donatella.
Sure. So one of the reflections that came out in this kind of exhibit proposal was how really to engage with this collaborative response. So how really to make the whole thing interesting for both parts. Obviously, as you mentioned, Francesca, having in mind that there is a differential of power, but there is also a differential of expectation, because in our case, obviously, these Afghan owners, I mean, had the expectation that this art exhibit could keep attention alive and foster their experience in spite of the fact that we were in the COVID period. And so the whole setting was fragile. So their expectation was, in our case, our expectation was actually to get to know, I mean, a little bit more, obviously, of this kind of experience. And so the emphasis was definitely on the story through images that were able to recreate the emotions, the feelings that were attached to every single dish that they decided to present. And these every single dish were not actually dishes of tradition, but the dishes of memories of the trip, memory of their route, memory of their journey. So, I mean, it was a way in which through food, through this kind of dishes, to regain the emotion of a very challenging journey from Afghanistan to Italy. And by the way, I found it interesting that also Mena here, I mean, in a different context, but dealt with the Hazara people, as a matter of fact, as we did. Obviously the challenge was the possibility of being in the field and conducting field work in spite of the fact that we were in a very, I would say, delicate moment of our collective history in this, because I mean the COVID was actually for everybody, and being able, in spite of everything, to be there. That was our major challenge in terms of academic response. Well, we have been presenting in detail what was the experience and how it was meant to be for this young refugee that, I mean, engaged in a very interesting reflection on what is ethnic food. And they decided that the Round was not definitely an ethnic restaurant. And with so we had the challenge was, I mean, to pose difficult questions like the one, what's ethnic food for you? What do you think it is? Do you think that your own proposal in the culinary panorama of our town can be defined, can fall under the category of ethnic, and to realize that they had a very interesting way of conceptualize this kind of category, not being academics. So I think that this perspective of having people that were, engaged in research, being able not only to talk to, but to be able to reflect upon their own history and the conceptualization of what their experience was. It was actually the interesting part for us researchers, and I think it was actually a shared experience at this kind of level. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda.
Yeah. So I will talk more about the reaction of the academic community, because I haven't shared my poetry with the research participants, but I think it's important to mention that. It's, for me, the tension between rhetoric and academic way of writing that is only reproducing, for me, how I read it, is really reproducing power relations in the way of writing, or who is right, who is not, how we have to decompose autoethnography, ethnography, psychology, and we have to make really distinct I'm looking for the word, sorry, distinct boundaries between all these dimensions. But for me, just going back to the emotions just come at once, with internal feelings, with external action that are happening. So going back to emotions, to start poetry, so going back to the feelings and emotions, allows to make connection between autoethnography, our own positionality, but also how it affects and how it concretely affects the research partners, and also the political and economic context in which we are included as a researcher. And so it's a way to go further than only a little reflection at the beginning of the text, but it's really a way to include it in the main text. But it asks a lot of argumentation. So it really asks a lot of patience. But also it has, like I did with my colleague, to go and to try to challenge also the power relation inside of the anthropology community, the community of anthropologists. And it's also a motivation to participate to this panel today, is that I think we are stronger in a collective way. So it's both a personal quest and also a collective way of changing things. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Menahil.
Yeah.
Page 2 of what would the
So
question 1.
with this, sorry,
Also, contribution towards that.
can you hear me?
Question 2.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay.
Dismissing power comes with conclude not unit my attitude to new line 3. Third question. Research partners always warm and welcoming.
So in response to the third question, as I think it would be very evident from my previous anecdote as well, my research partners have been very warm and welcoming. But again, when it comes to that, I would say it's like there is a complexity in itself involved, because it has a language of its own, or rather, it's in itself a language that has its own rules, where cultural sensitivities also play a role, and not like there is a lot which is just unspoken, and then it's important to pay attention and to be careful about everything that's spoken and unspoken. And in these cases, then the experience the experiences of intangibility are also very important. Like for my research, it's also very important that I pay attention to not only where the touch was performed, but also to the non-performativity of touch. So first, I think it was very important for me to be more considerate of what is happening, where something is happening, where not only on my part, but also on part of my research partners, if we are getting into that contact or that physical contact or not. And then this is like, I also feel that the performativity of touch, even the non-performativity of touch, like in both the aspects, both the dimensions, they were also indicative of the relationships between me and my research partners, like the strength and also the depth of the relationships. And like the non-performativity of touch especially comes into action when considering, as I mentioned, the cultural sensitivities, when it is me with my male research partners, like interaction across genders.
Different type of talent.
And then I direct myself now to a different type of challenge here.
Mostly in periphery.
I do feel that these aspects are mostly discussed or stay in the periphery and are not that much in focus
Own experience in the field.
in researches and ethnographic studies, particularly when it comes to
Particularly when it comes
the researchers or ethnographers' own experience in the field.
often
And
find relevant
therefore,
literature to help me shape my own
it
argument.
was a challenge for me to find relevant literature in order to help me frame my own arguments.
Often feel that
Um,
I do not have
and
appropriate words to describe.
I also feel that I do not, like this is a feeling, a very strong feeling sometimes, that I do not have appropriate words to describe my own experience in the field,
To do justice to my experience.
like describing it in a way that would do justice to the experience itself.
Application grammatical error. Challenges of expression and writing.
So with these challenges of expression, they are not only in writing,
Those
but
experiences.
also I would say when talking about those experiences or like taking part in discussions like these,
Excited
for
at the same
which
time and often confusion.
I am very excited, but at the same time I am engulfed in
Application
confusion
grammatical error.
because
Down into my own self as well.
this is this requires going deep down into my own self.
Deeper insights. Deciding on what to
Um,
write and what not to write.
because often in response to discussions, there is a demand or questions that require even deeper
Requiring
insights.
deeper insights. Deciding on what to write
And
what not to write.
then it's it's also confusing for me to decide on what to write, what not to write, what to talk about, what not to talk about,
Researcher non-anonymity.
because it's all based on my personal experience, and then at some points it can get, or it does get, too personal.
Including researcher non-anonymity.
And with this, I'm not saying that it's something bad or good, but with this, I do feel that, like, because in ethnography, we do include lots of details, very detailed vignettes and everything. So there are details from the stories that we get from our research partners. But then the research partners are anonymized. But when it comes to the researcher, everything would go to the academic audience, to whoever would be reading or listening to whatever I have written or I have said with my name. So it still would it still would be associated with me. And I think that somehow also contributes to being more careful in what should go out and what should not, what should be filtered then.
Concluding remark. Annotation writing issue. So much of
So
confusion.
yeah,
discomfort in reviewing
I would
content
just
that is considered
I would just conclude by saying that yes, it's like the biggest challenge for me, I would say, is because at times some people ask about the emotions or how I felt in those moments, or maybe what would the emotional response of the research partners would be. But then even if I talk about my emotions and if it's getting too personal, it's all confusion. So my biggest challenge here is confusion in what to reveal and what not to reveal, what to write, what not to write.
Page 2, third question.
Thank you so much.
U.US.
Okay, we can go on with Eleni.
Yeah, so I will start in a positive way and see where this can take us. So we're seeing a very high interest in the forms of storytelling that otherwise hosts, which is of course very encouraging, not just for us as a magazine, but for the research community more widely. And broadly speaking, when you use storytelling to discuss ethnography, because the latter is very much rooted in real life settings, there are a number of considerations to keep in mind while writing the story and along the way as well. Two major ones are anonymity and ethics. So with anonymity, even though we can share a story as a means of discussing difficult or sensitive topics, we also need to avoid any accidental disclosure of participants' identities. And there is a lot of work and refinement that needs to go into that to achieve a good balance between these two. With regards to the ethical dimension, there's this issue of who owns the story and whose story it is being shared, which is something that is a matter of quite a big interest for me. And it's also something that Caroline Ellis has written extensively about if you're interested. So we claim stories to be our own or to have been created by us, but most of the cases, this is not the case. And I will go back to the fieldwork in Samothraki to give you an example. So when I talk about my experience of the deluge in Samothraki, because of the ethnographic approach I took, I reflected a lot on the impact this had on me. I'm also mindful that this story is not just my story, but it does not include just me. In fact, it is the story of how an entire island community and how the lives of numerous islanders became intertwined through the experiences of the deluge. So this means that there are a number of instances as well as perspectives shared by other people that I do not include in my stories, mainly for two reasons: to protect their identity, so this relates to anonymity, but also to filter the details that I might be aware of and might have been told about, but I understand that they do not want to have out there in the public. So this relates to ethics. In practice, when ethnography is channeled through storytelling, no matter whether this is poetry, fiction, non-fiction, pictures, or videos, this in practice means you have to take a step back, because no matter the origins of the story itself needs to open up to a bigger world of possibilities for those willing to engage with the story, as long as you want it to, as long as you want others to relate to the story you're sharing. So, for example, when I write a poem or a story, then most of the times this is inspired by real life events or something that I have heard of, for example. Once I have a first draft ready, I always reconsider the level of real life precision it needs to include. And in the editing process, there are details that I might have to let go of, or details I might have to obscure, as well as elements or even characters. Entire characters are just invented to ensure the coherence of the story. So everything I have talked about right now, I do not really consider it too much of a challenge in the strict sense, at least not when you have experience in the writing and the editing process. And I will mention it again because I think it's very important. The idea of having an editor to work with you on a submission is that it enables people interested in this ethnographic or ethnographic storytelling approach, and it doesn't have to be exclusively anthropologists, bring the best out of their stories without necessarily having this editing experience I have just described. So I would say that the work we do with the magazine actually mitigates the challenges faced by new ethnographers as well as more experienced ones who want to experiment with the new ways of writing. However, what I do see as a challenge in light of all this, and this is something I have been considering for a while now and I don't have an answer to, so we can discuss it later if you want, is how we can actually secure the space and the time that is needed for this writing and editing process to take place, which can be very intensive, can even be draining if someone's new to it, both for their mind and their emotions. if you consider that the research world we live in now is more and more governed by staff hours, tight deadlines, and measurable deliverables, and that undoubtedly there are research topics that are very important, and sharing the findings of them, of the research gathered weight. So the climate crisis is apparently a good example. But on the other hand, as a poet, I have to admit that I very much dread the moment poetry becomes subject to conditions of productivity and impact. So I will close in a negative way, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am actually moved by what you all have been sharing with us, and how generous you were in sharing so much. Since, I mean, this panel is supposed to end in 3 minutes, I think we can stretch a bit the time, but I would do something different from what we said at the beginning. So I will not talk, actually. I will leave the floor to you all, because I think that perhaps there are questions you want to ask to each other, or comments, or go on, because I feel there's a kind of a flow in this collective thinking. I don't want to interrupt this flow, so I leave you the floor. And then I will probably take just 1 minute to wrap up. Not too much, because I agree with Menail. Confusion is something we're looking for. So to you.
I just break the floor. I wanted just to ask Mena here, but also Eleni, I guess also Francesca, and especially Amanda, that there is a sort of leitmotiv, there is a sort of that was present in this kind of roundtable. My one much less, but it was emotion. Emotion was really the act, I would say, the actress, no, in this kind of roundtable. So my question here is, if you were somehow influenced by the important work by senior anthropologist Michael Jackson, that first introduced this kind of field of study, emphasizing what is things and aspects of life that we do all share and have in common. And only when we do experience that kind of situation, life situation, we can talk with our interlocutors, with our with people we are conducting research with in a deeper way. In a deep way. In other words, for him, only if we do share the same emotion, for instance, for a loss, for a gain, for a moment of a very strong feeling, the birth of a son, of a child, and so on and so forth, we can really, I would say, overcome the difference of power. That's the other thing that was mentioned here. So this kind of power variable that's always there, lingering on our research, well, it is actually overcome in Michael Jackson idea when we do share that moment, very emotional, very strong, that eliminates this kind of power, just because we discover ourselves all fragile, or people that need, just because of our human condition, we have this kind of powerful moment that are upon us. So I was actually asking if, well, some of you likes to comment on this field of emotion, then it occurs to me, of course, I mean, the contemporary Italian Pussetti that actually devoted a lot of her research on anthropology of emotion, and obviously other contemporary. So how, as a matter of fact, I mean, reading their works, did you find yourself, I mean, in line with that? Or did you find that you could add something, that your research could add something on this field of study? And if so, in what sense? Because, okay, of course, I mean, confusion and ambiguity, the gray zone are, matter of fact, I do see them as in very positive terms, because I mean, it's not something clear cut, it's something that could become. But in any event, so how do you position yourself in the mainstream of anthropology of emotion? That's bottom line the question. Thank you.
Audio now unmuted.
I can answer, start maybe, if you want. Yes, I actually find myself in his thinking, and I was thinking about this concept of boundary disruption when the researcher, the ethnographer have to lose a kind of normal balance that he have between being open to the world and protecting himself or herself, you know. And I feel this a lot during the field, in a point that I question my mental health, actually, during the research. But more in general, going behind his thinking, for me, emotion was used as an ethnographical lens, but not just my emotion. I was working a lot with the emotion of the people that I met. And there is a chapter of my thesis that speaks exactly about
support has joined the meeting.
The political of emotion that health workers in a health center of Doctors Without Borders use to work with children and teenagers in the last stage of AIDS. And so I think that, in my opinion, emotion become actually a political force inside the field work, but in the relation of care. So they enter a lot in the care process, also in the biomedical field.
I don't know if I can also add a response. For me, I really like Michael Jackson, but I use it more for the mimetism, for how we learn techniques by doing them. And I didn't know about this kind of sharing the emotions, so that's very interesting. Thank you for the input. And about it also make me think of the reciprocal vulnerability of or of the vulnerable observer of Ruth Berha. And there are also this concept that broader distinction. I really like all things that all concept that helps to blur the distinction between researcher and the research partners, and how we are included, how we are simply a human being in the world. And there is also the concept of senti pensar, feeling thinking, that we also think with the heart, and we feel with the head in some way. There is a way of how we can feel emotion as a connection with others, but also with the landscape and
tech support has left the meeting.
Everything. So yes, I think there is many approaches to emotions, and some people think it's only a reaction. Some people think it's more complex than only a reaction. So yeah, I think it's yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to add.
We still have time for me to add something more.
Yes, sure. I think we can take 5 more minutes for you to finish this round of answers.
Okay, good. Yes, I was also thinking about the reciprocal vulnerability. And in my case, I would say that also because there was already like a vulnerability, like my vulnerability that was too obvious. And though it was not the same shared by my research partners, but they were vulnerable in their own way, living in like while living in Pakistan, still not having, like most of them not having proper like valid documents for their stay, or trying to get extensions, visa extensions, and still waiting for a response, and still nothing heard back on their asylum applications and things like that. So reciprocal vulnerability in that sense, I thought about that. But then I also felt that it was more of a perception on their part that I do not know exactly, like I cannot say what connected what connects me to them. If it is just their perception of me based on what, based on our shared uh proximity, being closely situated, based on uh, like the relations that we have established because of being in, like, because I do feel the reason I focus a lot on touch is because this is something that I do not experience a lot with many people. And then I do feel it breaks a barrier, that when there is no like, it's more like you enter someone's personal space, that you are close enough and you let the other person close enough to you as well. And I do feel it's also then like there could be many different reasons, but then also I wanted to just very briefly talk about the power dynamics. Like when it comes to me, I think there were little things with what I gave, sort of I made my research partners powerful. In a way, like the power was shifted to them in other ways as well. Like for example, when I was using a voice recorder for recording the interviews, and then I would just tell them, because once it happened with me that the recorder was out of memory and it just stopped and I didn't realize. So then I just put the recorder in the middle and I asked them, okay, now it's your responsibility to pay attention to it. And if the light goes off, like if the light gets turned off on it, it means that it's not recording, and you have to tell me if something like that happens. So then they are in charge of that. So there are little things that bring us to an equal level of conversation, like where it's not the interviewee, even with the, but it's more of a conversation where we are at the same level, I would say.
So for me, when I did the field work, I used mixed methods to collect the materials, and as part of that, I did a survey with the local population, and they were asked to disclose their emotions right after the night of the flood, and that was related to their location during the flood, whether they were impacted and to what extent they were impacted, when they realized, or whether they were realized at all while it was still raining, that this was not a regular rainfall. As well as share their emotions when a year had passed since the flood. And of course, people didn't share the same emotions. Their emotions depending on how much they had been impacted by the flood and their personal circumstances, and also how quickly they were able to overcome the impact. However, what I realized during the field work was that people actually, the community shares the same trauma, which is not an emotion, it's a different thing. But the fact that they had to stay on an island, very few people had the opportunity to live for a year until the restoration was complete, or more than that, actually. The fact that you have to stay on a small remote island with limited resources, especially during the winter time, and be exposed every single day to the same stimuli of the disaster, So the flood sites, the mud, the landslides, community buildings that have been destroyed, housing that had been destroyed. There was no hospital, still being reconstructed actually 7 years later. This unwilling exposure to these stimuli had as a result the community feeling to an extent that the flood in itself and the impact it had actually even put them in a very vulnerable position. And this created a trauma, regardless of how much they have been individually impacted. And what I realized during attending the community-wide meetings every month was that through reworking their relationship with the landscape and trying to reestablish how they can be more sustainable in their ways of living and their ways of being on the island. And again, because they didn't have the opportunity to leave the island, they had to find a way to make things work in spite of all the odds. They actually managed to overcome this and develop a new relationship through their trauma with the environment and reconsider how their actions going forward can be, well, not resolve the climate crisis because it's a global thing and your actions are never enough or as decisive, but can at least pave some indications for a similar event in the future. So this actually pushed me into designing a new theoretical framework that I introduced as environmental trauma, which is a collective. It's a collective affect in a way that is shared by the community. But I wouldn't say it's as simple as an emotion because it shouldn't be something that you experience for a long period of time. Otherwise, it becomes a disorder.
Okay, so thank you all so much. I think we will not add anything to all of that. We will leave these final reflections as, I wouldn't say a conclusion, but I would say a point. Yeah, a starting point probably. I truly wish that we will continue all these reflections and in this way, so as a sort of collective thinking. This I think was the one of the many things I felt today with you. So this is sort of desire, my desire to continue all this. But for the time being, thank you so much, and I wish you all a good summer. Okay, I think the volunteer is coming also to ask us to. Okay. Yeah, we are late, but we are Italians. We are always late. Sorry for that.
Info 22 tech support to everyone. I'm sorry, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Support to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the
Anthropology.
organizer,
Read agenda.
Francesca.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Marta. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Amanda Jackson has left the meeting.
I don't know.
Now in.
Window.
Leave meeting. Default. Cancel. Donatella Schmidt has left them. Cancel. Leave meeting.
No, hai fatto bene. Okay, shall we just close the session?
Yeah, you can
the
just end it for
recording?
everyone and I'll also get kicked out. That's okay.
Sorry, I muted myself. Can you just repeat?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said that you can just end the session for all, and that's a wrap. Thank you so much for the great work.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.